Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Sean Lowery Show podcast. I'm here with James Mulvany. What's up, James?
How's it going, Sean?
It's going great. Thanks for jumping on from across the pond.
No problem. Pleasure to be here, as of course. Yeah.
It's amazing technology, right? That we can just have a casual conversation being in different continents. Isn't that
Thousands
cool?
of miles away. Yeah, it's great.
So cool. It's so cool that I've already thought about it so much that we should be in awe of it more, but we're almost used to it now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So why don't you tell me and the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. So thanks for the intro. I'm James. I primarily work in the audio space. So I have 3 different companies, all providing different services, but all focusing on audio, using audio as a tool to grow brands and grow podcasts, grow radio stations. So I have a company called radio.co, which is like a live streaming and online broadcasting platform, mainly focused the radio industry. I've got podcast.co, which is a production company. We create podcasts on behalf of brands. And we also have a hosting platform. So you can launch your podcast, distribute it to all the normal places, Spotify, Apple, etc. And then finally, we've got the newest project for us is a tool called matchmaker.fm, which is a community. We've just hit 35,000 members, which is pretty cool. So
it's a lot. It's a lot of people.
40,000 years is just kind of rapidly approaching, which is scary considering we only launched about a year and a half ago. And the idea of Matchmaker is really simple. It connects podcasters with amazing guests.
That's exciting. I love that concept. You know, I'm always looking for guests for the podcast.
Yeah.
And we've used the tool before, Matchmaker, and it's great.
Yep.
The more people that are on there, I'm assuming the more powerful the tool is, the more people can find other people and look for people in specific niches. So it's really cool. Radio. I think the radio element is interesting. So when I think of radio, I think of an outdated thing with too many advertisements. I never listen to the radio personally. It's in cars, but a lot of people, can hook up their aux cord. Tell me why radio? Is that, am I wrong? Am I off base and thinking that it's kind of going by the wayside?
It's interesting because there's this old term, isn't there? Video killed the radio star, because back in the 1950s and 60s, everyone was like, TV is going to kill radio. And it survived, I think it's like a personal medium. It's you and the presenter. So yeah, of course, not everyone listens to radio now, but the audience data, it was really interesting. So last year during this pandemic was a great year for us as a business. We had a record number of new people starting up stations, and it varied from stuff that was really hyper local, so maybe to service a specific community like a village or a smaller town or whatever, or it was to maybe focus on providing entertainment, specific genres of music or whatever it might be. And we also saw listener data, so because obviously we can see what our client stations, we can see how many people are listening. And we had about 3 times the amount of people listening across the board than we would normally see. And this sort of happened overnight, when it kind of got to March, April time, when lots and lots of different countries all over the world were sort of going into lockdown. And I think the reason for this is because people like that human interaction. You can listen to a playlist on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, and it's generated by an algorithm. But it's just not the same of having that kind of human connection of you and the person playing the music on the other end and talking about it, telling you their stories, telling you about the information on what's going on in the local area or funny entertainment, news, etc. So I think that's why radio is popular as it ever has been. And I think people turned to radio during lockdown because they were quite, sometimes people sat on their own, and it's different to watching TV. I think it's you can have it on the background while you're doing other stuff. And this is kind of why I really like podcasts as well, is that because they're sort of a medium that you can digest them passively whilst you're doing other stuff. You don't necessarily have to be staring at a screen in order to gain from it. Right.
The car, that's where most people listen to the radio.
That's right. Yeah.
Because it's right there. Cars come wired with it.
That's the thing. And I think, we're an online radio provider. So
online.
Yeah. So basically, our system links in with pretty much any device. So you could listen through smart speakers, you can listen to your iPhone, tablets, obviously traditional desktop laptops and stuff. And of course, sometimes then the stations will then take that feed and broadcast it over like a physical transmitter as well. And some are just online only.
Right.
But I think, again, the availability of things like smart speakers and the fact that, you can basically, you can connect your phone via Bluetooth to your car. You can play any radio station you want. So it doesn't have to just be what you're limited to on your sort of traditional dial. It can be, if you're really into some random genre of music, like for example, some of the most successful stations are actually ones which play like really obscure stuff. So there's a genre of music called K-pop, which is like
South Korea, right?
Yeah, Korean pop. And we have one particular client. They just play K-pop and they get an obscene audience. It's like it's crazy how much of a following this thing has.
Really?
Yeah,
that's awesome. And radio waves, right? The radio is limited to an area. Is that true with online radio as well?
No, it's online radio. You can tune in from anywhere. It's anywhere. It's a stream. It's just like
a stream.
If you're doing a live stream on Facebook or Google or whatever, you just tune into the stream and you can listen from anywhere in the world on
Makes
the
sense.
go.
And some people might like the fact that when you turn on the radio, you kind of have to listen to what's on. It sounds better to choose what you listen to. But sometimes I don't have cable anymore for TV, but sometimes I miss just not having to pick on Netflix what I want to watch and start from the beginning. I've even actually started picking movies that I've seen before on Netflix and just fast forwarding to the middle just because I've seen it and it's almost like I'm watching it on cable. But it does take the pressure off of having to choose what you want when you put on the radio, right?
I find myself when I use Netflix just like scrolling, just constantly.
Right, the whole time.
Like you just like, you can occupy just half an hour just going through like these just endless like pictures before you decide on what to watch. So sometimes it is easy just to press the button. And I think again, like people like listening up to with the radio. It's particularly breakfast radio. That's the busiest time it always has been.
Makes sense.
So lots of people still really like being waking up, listening to someone while they're getting ready. Going about their morning routine, taking the kids to school or going to work or whatever it might be.
Right, and doing other stuff and having it in the background. That's perfect.
Yeah,
you don't want to choose what's going on in that moment.
Absolutely.
So, entrepreneurial journey is one of my favorite things in the world. And I want to talk about podcasting from an entrepreneurial standpoint a little bit. But first, how did you get started in this? Is this something you've always been interested in? I mean, that's awesome that the pandemic brought you an extra level of success because so many people needed human interaction. They were listening. You didn't know that was coming, did you?
No, it was one of these things that we had to hire more staff just to keep with the increased demand. It very much caught us off guard. I mean, we didn't predict it, so it was right. It was a good one of these things in business. It was a great problem to have. Like we had to scale our infrastructure quite a lot. So there's all this kind of stuff we had to kind of react to quickly. And of course, we all were all working remotely while doing all this. But as a business, we sort of coped with it and we did really well. And it's so obviously there's so many businesses that have struggled as a result of the pandemic. So
but you decided to get into this business before the pandemic. So what interests you about it? Is it something specific to your skill set? Did you see a market and you're like, that is something I'm going to go after? Or what got you into it?
My journey with radio started when I was like 15, 16 years old. And I used to love listening to the radio as a kid. I love DJing. I love music. I used to kind of like go and like put on discos like in the school holidays for like kids going around on roller skates in the playground and stuff like that, And when I kind of got to 15, 16, I was like looking at different career options and I was like, maybe I should go and work in radio. I wanted to go and be on-air talent, So I started getting experience. I discovered online radio. This was like back in 2003, 2004. Okay. So it was kind of early days, like the internet isn't like it is now, but it was like you could actually find these radio stations that were broadcasting online and almost like pirate radio stations, from like back in the day.
Right.
So I kind of DJ'd on a few of them and then I started going out and working in local radio stations as well, in my area. But I was also, whilst I was doing this, I was also really, really interested in the internet. I was learning how to build websites. I kind of had a side hustle where I was designing logos and doing bits of web design and stuff like that for people, it's just sort of one of these things you do when you're a kid, when you said, you're 17 years old. My friends were going out and getting jobs in McDonald's. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to be an entrepreneur. How could I make some money quickly? And this is because I knew Photoshop. That was like, it seemed like a kind of a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
So I had that going on already. And then I kind of thought, well, I know now how this online broadcasting thing works. I'd sort of learned that whilst I was working in and around radio stations, and I thought, yeah, I mean, I could put together a website selling this, and I didn't quite know how to manage like the technical stuff. So in the end, I found a guy who was actually in Australia, and he agreed to we had some kind of agreement where like he'd go 50-50 with me for everything, for every server I sold, and he'd set it up and manage all of that stuff. Because I kind of didn't really, at that stage, I didn't really know much about the actual stuff that kind of went on behind the scenes. I was kind of hustling, and I think I just sort of saw a bit of an opportunity. I thought, well, I know I can sell this, but I don't quite know. I know how it works from like my side as a broadcaster, like how I can connect to it and stuff, but I had no idea how to like manage the servers. And then weirdly, like one day he moved house and just completely dropped off the internet. So I suddenly had customers signing up and I couldn't fulfill their orders. I very had to that's the cool thing about being young. I think you can learn new skills very quickly. So I really quickly had to start learning more and more of the techie stuff. And then from that, I kind of like taught myself to code a bit so I could start creating more, web applications and stuff like that. That allowed me to kind of grow the business and kind of start creating tools and, interesting little features for our customers that weren't there before. So that's kind of, that in a nutshell.
That's awesome.
Really
you had an entrepreneurial proclivity when you were only 17, which is special and awesome.
Yeah.
And then you picked an industry and you learned about it. And you, of course, had some problems like every entrepreneur does when they're starting, but you didn't give up. You figured them out. And now today you have a service, 40,000 people on there for Matchmaker, Podcast Co, Radio Co. So that's a cool story. I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. So podcast for entrepreneurs. Now, if you want to start a podcast and be successful from it as the first thing you do, it's kind of a hard place to start. Would you agree?
I mean, it depends. If you already have a great audience, then it can be really straightforward because obviously it's just another medium for them to interact with you. Correct. If you're starting from scratch without an audience and you maybe don't have a full grasp, and I think this is a mistake that a lot of people make when they're starting out, is they don't think about their audience enough. They just think, oh, I want to start a podcast. And I think gone are the days where, it could just be like two guys, oh, let's go and record a podcast in the pub and it does really well. Like that maybe would have worked 10 years ago. But nowadays, I think you've got to be more strategic about it. So especially for entrepreneurs, you've got to know who your audience is and think about what message, you're going to be delivering and what problems you're trying to solve. Try and figure out what kind of audience you want to reach. And then start with that and kind of work backwards. So don't think about, okay, let's just record the first episode. Let's think about who the audience is and maybe let's plan out the first season. There is an interesting fact is on the Apple podcast store. So, Apple don't host all these podcasts. It's just basically like a big directory. I think there's something like 30% of them just only have one episode. So that just goes to show that like there's so many people who start a podcast. They'll record their first episode, probably with the best of intentions, and maybe kind of expect it to just kind of blow up overnight, and then just sort of think, "Oh, this isn't working," and then just give up, or they just haven't thought about like what they're going to be talking about next. So, that's a great tip. I think this is when we're working with clients, we always say, look, don't just think about episode number 1. Think about what episode number 10 is going to look like,
right?
And try and kind of create a cohesive journey between the episodes if you can. Right. So if you've got a business that's operating in a certain area, let's say you have a marketing company and you want to create a podcast about marketing. Well, marketing encompasses lots of different things. Right. So for episode 1, you might want to find an SEO expert to interview. For episode 2, you might want to find someone who's a copywriter, and then someone who's a Facebook ads manager, and go out and tell this story and find people who you can interview and leverage their knowledge as well as your own to form like a kind of narrative across the whole series.
Right. And obviously there are so many podcasts now. It's very saturated. And when I first started my podcast, I was aware of that. And I promised myself that I would do 100 episodes in 100 weeks. And I'm at about 115 now. So I haven't picked up big time, but I know it is important to stick with it. Because you have to break through. You have to kind of figure out your audience. Of course, it's important to plan it. So do you think it's important to stick to one topic, stick to a theme in order to gain listeners?
Yeah, I think so, because I think people like, to a certain extent, to know when they go to, it's like the same thing with going to listen to a radio station, right? You turn on a radio station and you have a certain expectation of what you're going to get, right? You're going to, you turn on a radio station, it might be like rock music, and then you're going to hear rock music, or you hear like a classic station that plays music from the 60s and 70s or whatever it might be. Same with podcasts. I think your audience will switch on and they know you as the host, but the content kind of obviously needs to reflect what they're used to getting. And I think if you try and be too diverse and talk about loads of different things, I guess it works for some people. I mean, if you look at Joe Rogan, his guests kind of vary greatly. But I suppose the key theme is they're all interviews and they're all kind of like deep dives into different people's personalities.
And he's well known. He's most known now from the podcast, but he has been a successful comedian. He was on a TV show, news radio. It definitely helps. Personally, I would want to, my podcast, entrepreneurship's like my baseline thing. It's my favorite thing. I have my own company that's separate from this, that has been successful and is growing, and I can talk on that. But sometimes I have people on that I'm just interested in, and I like talking about different things, a little bit of politics, and I like doing that. But I do understand from the standpoint that if someone is going to tune into episode after episode, the thing that they would have to like the most would be just me and whatever I want to talk about, which is a lot harder to start if you're not already known. Right.
Yeah. But I guess also, there's an argument. Do you upload your podcast to YouTube?
Yes. Actually, YouTube is the one I think I focus on the most.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because the YouTube, an interesting fact about YouTube is like it's the second biggest search engine in the world. So it's obviously Google's first, then it's YouTube, and then Amazon is the third, I think.
And of course, Google owns YouTube, but
but people go to YouTube to find answers to questions. So if you're creating content and you upload it to, because a lot of podcasters don't bother uploading to YouTube, and I'm very much sort of thinking, yes, if you're recording this, again, you should record it video and audio. It's kind of quite important now. I think, again, podcasts don't just have to be an audio only medium. You should record a video, because you can either create other assets with that, like little short kind of clips that you can put on different social platforms, or put the whole episode up on YouTube. And if you get your keywords right on there, naturally you can attract certain traffic. So, if people are looking, if you interview an expert on, say, I don't know, like green tea and healthy living, that kind of stuff, there will be people looking for stuff like that, So if you can make sure that you get your keywords, you get your description all right, naturally, it's a great way to discover new content on YouTube. Whereas I think the actual podcast directories themselves, so talking about Spotify, Apple, etc., they kind of still got a long way to go with discoverability. I think their search features are quite basic.
I hate the search on there. I listen to all my podcasts on YouTube, and I'm actually upset sometimes, because there'll be a podcast that I know I used to like that I listen to on Apple, and then I remember a year later, like, oh, I haven't listened to that because it's not on YouTube. And if it was, I'm sure I would be on there. But I enjoy listening on YouTube. That's where I listen to everything. That's just my base to kind of go to if I'm in the car, or if I'm just listening to something. Yeah. So I have a proclivity towards YouTube, and it does have a great search feature. And the Apple and Spotify, they're not great. They're not great for searching.
No, that's the thing. There's a big discoverability problem in the industry. Like, people still struggle to find new podcasts. Although I think one of the other good things about podcast, you said, okay, there's lots of competition now. Like I think it's like something like 2.23 million podcasts now on Apple, which has doubled. Like, that figure was like 1 million. They announced 1 million last year, and before that, it was
30% don't count, because they only did one episode.
30% don't count. But then a lot of these podcasts have been created. 1 million of these podcasts have been created over the past year, and a lot. Again, really, really popular during lockdown. It's like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm sat there rattling around in my room, like, let's go and talk to some people.
Right.
And it's amazing the amount of people who just, again, they'll go out and buy all the gear, record one episode, and then just kind of give up. But
I mean, that's just a general business thing. You have to know, if you're going to start something, it's not going to happen right away. It's not going to happen overnight. So they probably didn't understand that element. But hey, I mean, I don't mind not everyone having one. Every time a celebrity or somebody starts a podcast, I'm like, oh, all right. Not that I'm directly thinking about competition, but there's another one. That's another one. People have a lot of options
I think the good thing about celebrities coming into podcasting, because it seems like all of them are now, right? It seems like every single celebrity is starting the podcast. I think that has helped the popularity of the medium, like,
sure.
I
don't think it needs help.
Yeah. If you went up to someone like 5 years ago, though, in the street and said, "What's a podcast?" I reckon you might get 50% of people who would say, "Oh, yeah, I listen to podcasts, or I know what podcasts are." I think if you go up to someone in the street at random today, like probably 90% of people will know what a podcast is or listen to podcasts. And I think the celebrity thing has helped that. Yeah. So it kind of helps us. It helps us kind of little guys, or however you want to put it as well, us independent producers, because, there's more traction, there's more people looking around the medium and exploring the different podcasts. Yeah.
All right. So I know you give a lot of good advice on audio equipment, lighting equipment, microphones, music, like all the things that go into it. I don't really care to cover all the specifics of that stuff. Watch your videos for all that.
Yeah.
I think all that stuff is important. When I'm listening to a podcast and it has bad, grainy quality, and I'm not saying mine's the best, it's something we're continuing to work on, but I don't enjoy it as much. I do think it matters.
Yeah.
But how much do you think it matters? Do you think if Brad Pitt starts a podcast with terrible quality, terrible video, bad equipment, what do you think matters more? What are the percentages of how much do you think the production quality matters versus how much do you think what you're saying or who your audience is matters?
I kind of like it's an interesting question. If Brad Pitt started a podcast but it was completely crap, would it do well?
Right.
Probably, yeah.
Would people drop off after the bad quality after a couple episodes? Or
I think there's no, right. So there's no excuse now. If you're serious about starting a podcast, go out and invest in some equipment. You don't have to go out and spend like thousands and thousands of dollars. You can go and pick a good quality USB microphone up for like $50 to $100, and it will make the difference between you sounding, like you're in a kind of big echoey room if you're just relying on like your iPhone to record or a built-in mic on your computer. But then, of course, you can go out and you can spend $500 on a nice mic like you've got in front of you, like the one I've got in front of me, or you can spend $1,000 on a mic. But I don't think the difference between spending, say, like $100 or $500 or $1,000 on a mic is going to be that noticeable. But certainly there is a difference between going out and getting a good mic and making sure that, you're in a quiet room. You haven't got like traffic rushing past or the kids screaming in the background. And just like not, so making like zero effort. So I think you've got to at least try and get some quality. I mean, there are people who say, "Oh, don't worry about gear, don't worry about that stuff. You just need to get a good story. You just need to get, interesting."
I understand what they mean when they say that,
right? Yeah.
Right. But if you're going to do that, at least get the $50 mic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do think the equipment matters, quality matters, but it doesn't matter if your podcast sucks.
It doesn't. No, exactly. You've got to have, this is a kind of good way. I'll go back to what I said before. It's like, I think you've got to try and think about your audience, what kind of content they want, like exactly what value you want to deliver to your audience.
All right. So the other thing is, all right, so you have the best quality equipment and you have the best content for a specific audience. Now they need to know about it. Right. So essentially the marketing of a podcast, is there any formula? Is there any tips you have? What are the best ways you think to kind of get it out there? You're in quarantine, you start talking, you're a genius. Yeah. You have great points, you have great equipment. What's next because no one's if you just upload it to Spotify, iTunes, I mean, no one's probably going to find it.
No, well, I mean, unless you get really lucky, sometimes people just get lucky.
I mean, you can't bank on that,
but you can't. Yeah. So I think, there's no magic formula. I mean, I think, again, people sometimes come to me, they ask me, like, they expect me to be some sort of great secret behind like growing a great podcast. And
be good.
Unfortunately, if there was, it would be great. But a lot of it is just down to persistence, quality, value, authenticity. That kind of is my formula, QVCA. But one thing a lot of people don't bother doing, which I always find interesting, and I think it's really important to do, is have a website for your podcast at least, or have and start building a mailing list so who your listeners are.
An email list.
Yeah. So because this is the thing, if you are getting listeners through Spotify, through Apple, you want a way of engaging with them. You want a way where you can talk to them and kind of extend the conversation beyond the podcast. So a mailing list is a really good way of doing that. Also making sure like that you can, that just you're accessible. Like, so just announce an email address that people can reach you with questions and get involved, within the actual podcast itself. A lot of podcasters just don't bother with that. They'll sit there, they'll say, okay, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But the easiest way to do that is just have a call to action. You go visit my website. And for example, if you go to jamesm.com/podcast,
there you go.
I've got like a free download, which will tell you like some tips for creating a really good quality podcast. So that's something I'll throw in at the end of a lot of my videos, or if I'm recording episodes, or if I'm being interviewed.
And then they're on your list, and then you can shoot out to them next time you have a new episode.
Absolutely. Next time you got a new episode, or if you, exactly. It's about creating that conversation and reminding, because again, people aren't always going to hit that subscribe button on. They might listen to an episode on Apple.
I listen to a lot on YouTube and Spotify without subscribing.
Absolutely, yeah. But if you've got access to that, if you can convert at least some of that traffic into subscribers on your email list, you've then at least got that ability to remind them that another episode's come out. Whereas if you don't do that, they'll listen to might find one of your episodes great, but they'll subscribe and you won't see them put that person coming back. So I think that's like kind of like my top tip. That's certainly the thing I feel like most, weirdly, like still a lot of podcasts that just don't do that, which I think I'm
mad at myself. I actually have an email list, SeanLowery.show. It's on the top, but I haven't done anything with it. I haven't really put it out there, but I'm aware of the power for my clothing business I have, where I have 17 employees. It's going well.
Yeah.
Our email list is a huge resource for getting sales. And I know the power of it. It's so important, but for the podcast, it's something I definitely need to focus on more, and I'm doing it on Instagram and Twitter. I'm trying to be authentic, be myself. But an email list is, I think, a great one. Yeah, and it's essentially, it's cheap. The more subscribers you have, the more it costs. But it's something that once you put out a podcast, you get a few people listening. Maybe on YouTube, it helps the algorithm. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Like, again, like if you use this, obviously those are different ones, but like MailChimp is like one of the most popular, isn't it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can start for free on a lot of them. So if you've got like up to 250 subscribers or something, it probably is going to cost you nothing. So and you don't, you can set up a domain and just redirect it to an opt-in page, which they'll host for you. So you kind of don't even need to be like, have a super fancy website or anything to start doing that. But I just think, collecting the data and try and find out who you're, because again, if you can, if you could potentially build a Facebook group, so it gives your audience a way to sort of like interact with you. That. And if you start actually learning who your audience are and kind of profiling them, that can help a lot.
It helps a lot. And because you can then think, right, okay, and you can ask them questions, what sort of stuff do you want to hear next? Or if there's anything you want addressing that we can help you out with on our show, put it in here.
I'm mad at myself for not doing that too, because again, for our clothing business, we have a private group, about 5,000 members, and they're obsessive in there. We ship them things, they post it, like hundreds of comments on each thing. We get great insight from them. And I understand the power of that as well. Like all the things I do great for marketing, I do for my clothing business, and I got to pass some of those over to the podcast. Now, another thing that we do a lot of for selling clothing is ads, like paid ads, Facebook ads. A lot of success with that. I'm very knowledgeable and experienced, like with running Facebook ads, knowing what rates I need to make profit, all that. Do you have any paid strategies? Say someone has a big budget and they want to spend money to get their podcast out there. Where would be the first place you might start spending money?
So as interesting as this is, like quite often it's easier to advertise a podcast on another podcast because you're not asking people to switch medium. They're kind of, that person's already engaged in listening to podcasts. So, spending money, if you've got a big budget, and we've done this with some of the bigger shows that we've helped launch, just running audio ads can be a really good way, because again, just go and find similar podcasts that you think will attract that right audience. But then of course, you can use, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, obviously traditional Google ads, that sort of stuff. But I think, you always need a hook, don't you? So you really, and again, I would sort of be more inclined to like direct people to a page where they could subscribe for something, and then just like remind them of the podcast, because I think it's easier to measure effectiveness. Then it's quite difficult still to sort of say, okay, let's advertise the podcast, and then quantify like how many of those people listening have actually come from advertising. There's no real mechanism of doing that.
Right.
Whereas, again, I feel like traditionally you might send people to a landing page, get them to opt in. They can listen to the first episode, but then they'll also get like some freebie or something, you'll send them something cool. That's probably a good strategy for advertising, because you can measure your effectiveness of your campaign super easy then, right? You've got a direct way of saying, okay, for every subscriber it's cost us so many dollars, and then we can email those subscribers and feed them back into the podcast.
You need a call to action in every ad. So you think a good ad for a podcast might be, hey, this is the Sean Lowery Show. If you're interested in entrepreneurship and interesting guests and conversations about the world, sign up for our email list. We're giving out I don't know, some type of prize by the end of the week, and then
one of the easiest prizes to offer, which is like, we've tried this again with various different businesses we have, is just like giving people Amazon gift cards, right? Because everyone uses Amazon to buy stuff.
Or just money, right? Like Venmo,
exactly.
PayPal.
We'll post you $1 bill in the post if you subscribe to our show. That would probably work.
Yeah. So, but again, you can spend all the money in the world. You can have the best equipment. If you're not connecting and you're not connecting with an audience, that's like the first thing to kind of know. But it does help. It's hard because if you're just talking to nobody, you're not getting any feedback, so you don't really know what the audience wants. So you have to have some type of group or someone give you some feedback so you can kind of know. It's like a chicken and the egg situation.
Yeah, I think it's important. And but again, you can, like, if you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about creating a podcast for your business, right?
That's a different thing. Yes.
Yeah. You can look at your existing customers and like frequently asked questions, or you can go and speak to your support team or your sales guys, and you can say, right, what are the problems that we can address, or what are the questions that come up time and time again? So that's kind of a good starting point if you're specifically like doing
for
it
your business, right?
Yeah.
If it's for your business. Now, that makes a lot of sense for people who are in B2B. If they sell marketing services, or they sell SEO, or even something like you do, where you're trying to get people to come to your thing, it makes sense, because then the people that are searching for that type of content will listen to you, and then they're like, hey, I need this service. Yeah. And then they already have you as a resource. Yeah, my podcast is completely separate from like my actual business. So I'm kind of starting that business, the podcast business, from scratch. Yeah. So it's a different journey, and I enjoy that, starting from the beginning. And my audience is, even like the girls' clothing business, I'm not sure if they would be, as interested in the entrepreneurship stuff. So it's a fresh start. So I like starting myself from the beginning again.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about this. Guests, of course, you know a lot about guests, and I understand the power of going on someone else's show, connecting with their audience, having someone on your show. I've had lots of guests, about probably 90 to 100. Most of my podcasts have been with guests. Mm-hmm. Most of them, all of them, mine basically, essentially, have been on like what we're doing now, on Zoom or on video. Yeah. And I'm in this room right now. It's a studio I'm looking to build up. I just got a new building. I have this wing of the building where I'm doing this, but I want to build it into an area where people can come by, because I hear about the power and the extra energy that comes from an in-person podcast. Do you have any take on the power of doing it in person versus doing it on Zoom?
That's really interesting, Sean. So yeah, like, because I had a podcast which I launched, it would have been the end of 2019, and it was called Create, Reach, Inspire. And we did one season, and again, very similar to you, about interviewing entrepreneurs. And that was mainly face to face. So I think like we did, 8 episodes in the season, and I think like 6 of them were face to face. I was really keen on getting people who had done really well in the local area that I could sit down with face to face. And I completely agree. I think video is great, and it's come along a long way. Like, we couldn't have done this sort of 10 years ago. It just wouldn't have looked as good, and you could, the technology wasn't there. Whereas but I do completely agree. Like,
can you break
in
down
any business
why?
situation, it's great shaking hands and just saying, hi, nice to meet you. It's the same when you go for meetings, isn't it? Like, that kind of that handshake, that kind of personal interaction just sets things up on a completely different tone to just being on a screen. And I don't know exactly why it is, but I just think,
I believe it, and I've heard it over and over, and I'm working towards it.
Yeah,
it's just funny to think about, because but then I'm a hard worker. I'm always trying to, focused on many things. One thing I think about, and this is probably kind of silly, but I would love to host an experience here. So, there's traveling involved. If you want to get local, that might limit you. But I'm thinking when someone comes, say I have a great guest. I had Robert Greene on my podcast, the author of the 48 Laws of Power. Incredible. One of my favorite authors. Actually, when we first reached out to him, we mentioned possibly coming in. The studio's not really ready yet, but I was thinking if he did come, which he didn't, I had a great podcast with him. How much am I responsible to, I'll pick him up at the airport or then go out to dinner with him after that, which would make my whole day.
I certainly think, if you look at it that way, it can be. And again, a lot of people do podcasts as a way to do business development because you get you can quite often, get past those gate people. If you approach someone, say, "Oh, hi, can I speak to the CEO?" Of course you aren't, no, or send us send me his PA. If you suddenly say, "I want to interview the CEO for my podcast," like it just puts a different perspective. And then you kind of interview the CEO or the boss. And like we see lots of companies doing this, and they just do this purely so they can get through to the decision makers, build that rapport, build that relationship. And so, it can be really,
so
really
in that
powerful
sense, in that case, it makes perfect sense to pick them up and hang out with
networking.
It's
just it's just like going to conferences or going to breakfast meetings or whatever it might be that you do, in your local area, or if you fly go and visit a conference internationally. They're great. They're great places to go networking. And I think you can kind of treat podcasting the same. And I think you're right. It is an experience. But what was really interesting when I did the first season of mine, and then I was going to do a second season, and then we went into lockdown. So I kind of, in the end, just didn't carry on with it because I wanted to keep them face to face. So maybe I'll reboot it this year, sort of next year at some point. But the thing I noticed was that some people were like, especially it was their first podcast, and we took them into the studio, and it was like they were kind of almost a bit like freaked out and intimidated by it, because it was like, you're sat in this environment that feels not like, it's comfortable, but like you've got big bright lights, lots of cameras around you, like multiple microphones,
intimidating kind of.
So I think with some people it's a bit like, oh whoa, what is this? It's a bit weird if they've not done it before. But I think then when you just sit them down, make them comfortable, and just say, look, just forget about all this stuff that's around you, and just talk to me as if we were having a conversation. Right. That's really like your goal as the host, is to try and make them feel comfortable and make sure. But then again, sometimes people find that super exciting. It's like, oh wow, this feels really cool. I feel like I'm on some kind of Hollywood movie set, So it's but I completely agree with the experience thing. Why not? And if you can get people in face to face, and if they'll come out and see you, that can only be a good thing, right?
Yeah. So you concur. I've yet to hear somebody say, no, person to person is not as good as Zoom. I've never heard anyone say that. So you're on board with the person to person thing.
Yeah. Sure.
Right. And no one has been able to put an exact, like, break it down into a science, but I mean, everyone kind of understands human interaction. There's something better about it.
We're social creatures, aren't we?
We're social creatures. Yeah. There's something that can ultimately create a better podcast because there's just something about it. And when I watch a podcast, I was thinking about it. All the podcasts that I like, mostly, I can't think of one that's Zoom only. They're all in person. And you never think about how they got there, who paid for the flight, what they're doing after. You don't think about that stuff. But there's just clearly something better about in person. So that is something I'm working towards. In the meantime, this is way better than a phone call or anything. So it's not the worst thing with Zoom, but it's better. It's better. What podcast do you listen to?
Do you know, I don't. I listen to lots of different podcasts. I'm not one of these people, like, I don't binge watch stuff on TV like Netflix. I'm the same with podcasts, so I don't really like have a set of podcasts that I go back to. There are some kind of like quite niche radio podcasts that I might listen to quite often. That's like nerdy radio stuff.
I guess what topics do you?
Business. I love listening.
Because there's two different mindsets for people listening, I think, to podcasts. And one of them is looking for chill, relaxed entertainment, kind of the radio vibe that you're talking about. The other one is intently looking to learn something specific. Right. And that's two different mindsets for the listener. If you want to be really engaged, it's kind of like reading a book. You have to it's not that chill. You want to have your mind on, you want to be thinking. It's different than a relaxed background conversation. You listen to more of like when your mind's on and listen to interesting topics.
I would say I've listened to very few entertainment podcasts. Like there are tons of my friends keep saying, "Oh, you should listen to this. It's so funny. It's like this comedian talking about this or that." You know, they've always got like comedians talking about weird like food and stuff like this.
Yeah.
But that just, I don't know. It doesn't appeal to me. Like business podcast is probably my favorite sort of genre, or stuff that's, to say, like really technical, like, you know, about certain topics that I'm interested in. Like but that's the great thing about podcasting. Huh?
Like microphones and podcasting and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Podcasts about podcasts.
Podcasts.
We're just launching a new series at podcast.co called Meet the Podcasters, which is exactly that. It's about, I'm not the host. It's one of my colleagues, also called James. And he basically interviews podcasts that he's seen has kind of taken off recently. So they're not always like huge names, but they're people who have managed to grow an audience. And basically the idea is he drills them on exactly how they've managed to do that and what they think they've done differently to other podcasts that haven't worked out. So, you know, that is really, really cool. And it can be useful if you're like looking to grow an audience. And there's lots of podcasts about podcasts, actually.
Yeah, I think that's funny because it's just a topic like anything else. Cooking, sports, podcasts are, if someone wants to start a podcast and they want to learn about it and they want to do a podcast about something completely different, they still need to listen to the podcast about podcasts to learn about it. It's just ironic that it's a podcast about a podcast. I mean, that's a topic that people are interested in.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, again, I most of my businesses are what was known as SaaS businesses, software as a service, right? So there's loads of podcasts out there on SaaS. There's Masters of Scales, quite a good one, you know.
I know that podcast.
Yeah. So and again, like some of the big names in podcasting, like Tim Ferriss, some of his episodes I've listened to. But you know, again, I just the thing is, it's like you can. I'm not that person that's, as I say, I've never been that person that kind of likes binge watching or binge listening. So I will just literally like dip in and out of different things. That's just my approach to how I listen to shows. Yeah.
So let me ask you about this. I mean, I essentially know the answer, but the monetization of a podcast, right? Ads, courses, information products, ads. Like that's the business model for how to make money, essentially, right? Or if you're doing the business development angle, it can drive, you know, business to your whatever you're selling. If it's marketing, is there any other ways to monetize besides that? I mean, there's a lot in there, but those are the main ways to monetize, right?
Yeah, monetize or attract a kind of headline sponsor. You know, so basically the sort of the industry average rates for podcast advertising are kind of like, so for every 1,000 listeners you get, let's say you pay a 30-second ad, you get $18, which doesn't sound like a lot for 1,000 listeners, but you know, if you have 100,000 listeners, suddenly that might become a little bit more interesting.
Right.
But some of the best examples that we've seen of podcasts that are successfully monetized is when they've actually reached out to sponsors directly and they know that, you know, they're a good fit for the audience. So it's like, it's looking at basically, you know, who your audience is and finding companies that have got really super focused products that are kind of a great match for your audience.
Right.
And then you can sometimes agree, like they'll pay you a fixed monthly rate. Which I think is probably the best way to monetize. And of course, then others is it's sponsorship, like sort of user supported podcasting is huge at the moment. Apple have just launched their own subscription platform. Before that, lots of podcasters use something called Patreon, or people just rely on like PayPal donations and stuff. So sometimes, you know, if you've got great content, I think listeners are kind of happy to pay for it now, and they're coming round to the idea. I suppose the fact that, you know, there's so many different subscription services now out there on TV, people are kind of used to paying for stuff, you know. It's just like it shouldn't, you know, because it does take a lot of time to create and edit shows, and if you're doing something really high quality, then, you know, you can charge for it.
If people really like you, I'm sure you can get a couple bucks out of them, which would help.
Yeah,
now
exactly.
You know, that's probably not as sustainable. A lot of times I'll listen to a Patreon, like Sam Harris. He has a podcast. In the beginning, he's always like, you know, if you want to, you can donate to my Patreon, or you don't have to. You can listen for free. And I'm like, okay, I'll listen for free. What am I, stupid? But he's not like my favorite. But You can ask, but the sponsorship thing. So one thing is I hate commercials. I just do. They annoy me. I work my life to get around them.
Yeah.
In that sense, I also advertise a lot for my business. So I understand the importance of advertising. Do you think have you ever seen any creative ways for getting a sponsor across to the audience besides for just a 30-second read?
Yeah, I mean, creative ways. I guess that's it. I've seen some really, really creative examples of how brands have launched podcasts, and use them as a kind of like a sort of like a viral tool. McDonald's did a really cool campaign. I'm trying to remember what it was called now. It's not. I haven't got it at the forefront of my mind. If you Google it, McDonald's podcast campaign, it'll probably come up. Let's just see if I can find it now. But they did something really cool. And it was, it wasn't like so obvious as just being, just this is McDonald's. I think it was called The Source. There we go.
So they had a podcast.
Yeah. So it's kind of like it's talking about source, but so it's kind of like basically one of these things. Like they sort of designed it, obviously with like a clever advertising agency that came up with this campaign. So it doesn't always have to just be like a direct. What
was their podcast about? Like, what were they talking about? The different types of sauces and nuggets and food, or how did they do it?
It says it brings about this story about the best intentions when McDonald's brought back the coveted Szechuan sauce, which I've never even heard of.
So they're telling stories.
So it's a sort of story about some sort of
the McRib sauce. The story behind them. Okay.
Yeah. Again, it's clever. It's like it's one of these things that's kind of. It was 2018 they did this.
That's cool.
Yeah. But that was a great example, I think, of using like a brand activation in podcasting. But it wasn't, the artwork and stuff. There's no M there. It's just called The Source, and it was just presented by McDonald's. But I just thought that was a really interesting use. That was like one of the sort of famous campaigns that a big brand has done to use podcasting. Yeah. In terms of like how you sell your products and services, I think one thing that you've got as a podcaster with your audience is trust. I think people for some reason, people are incredibly responsive to ads on podcasts. And I think quite a lot of the time that's because the adverts are being read by the host. Mm-hmm. So something like, I think it's like 70% of people have bought something advertised on a podcast or something like that.
That makes sense because they trust. And the person who's reading it isn't gonna just give you something terrible. No. They're gonna make sure it's something that they agree to and that their audience would be interested in. So don't do something completely snake salesman and offer a terrible product to your audience. I'm sure they wouldn't appreciate that.
I agree. I think there's again, if there's a benefit, like if there's some sort of like if there's a hook, if there's a giveaway, if there's some discount, if there's something like that where you're making your audience feel like they're getting something that you can't get elsewhere, that's always good as well, isn't it? So it's like, this is a discount code. It's just for my listeners. Go and buy, whatever it might be, clothing or something, but don't share this with anyone else because this is just for my podcast listeners. Immediately they feel special, right?
Right. Something I like just for advertising in general, because I hate commercials and I understand that people need to advertise. I love in a movie where there's like product placement. They'll have like a Coca-Cola or even in the sporting events where there'll be a Gatorade sitting perfectly facing the front. I appreciate those because I'm getting advertised too, but I don't have to have a break in it. So if you're wearing a certain shirt or something, I think that type of advertising is cool. Just it's subliminal, I guess, but just in the frame. But it's I always fast forward through the ads and podcasts, but I will say I do hear the first 5 seconds. So the product's now in my head and it accomplished their goal. And if it's something I need, it's in my head. So maybe I'll go buy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's the same with YouTube videos, isn't it? Quite often, like it's large, especially with the bigger YouTubers now, they'll have like this break in the middle where they'll talk about a certain product or service.
Right.
And
I hate the break.
Sometimes I think the way they do it sometimes could be really, really creative. Like that's what I like is when you see someone advertising something and they've kind of come up with this idea of how to pitch it, which is different to just saying, hey, go and sign up to this service, So creativity sometimes can kind of almost make the advertising entertaining. But you're right. It's like, I'll quite often fast forward them as well.
I do appreciate that. Or sometimes a comedian will do an ad read and they'll joke about it. And that is basically the show, them sitting there making jokes, but they're doing an ad read. So it's like a win-win, and people will also listen to it more likely. Yeah. Because
maybe take
jokes in there.
Maybe take more action on it as well, because it's just done and presented in a different style.
Exactly.
And, I think it kind of goes back to the thing about podcasting is it's like an intimate medium for the listener. So like, I think people listening to a podcast, they kind of almost just feel like it's just almost like you and them in a room.
Right.
That's why again, I think it's really, really popular, because it's just kind of, there's that kind of intimacy that you kind of don't get with TV, for example.
Right. Yeah, man, it's been awesome. What's next? What's next for you? You're going to keep growing Matchmaker. Who would be the number one person you would want to get to sign up for Matchmaker to help it grow?
Oh, I mean, do you know what? Like, if someone like Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan signed up, I'm sure they get a lot of messages. But yeah, generally speaking, it's a free community. Anyone's welcome to join. If you have a story to tell, if you're an expert, or if you have a podcast that you want to, you use to find guests, go and check it out. It's free to sign up. We've got lots of plans. We've got lots of things that we want to do with the community and the platform. And like, as I say, it's kind of only just beginning. So we actually had our roadmap meeting today, looking at what we're going to be doing at the end of this year and the start of next year.
Stay on top of it. It's a great market, and I think there's some competitors jumping in.
There is. Yeah, it's funny because there was this site called podcastguest.com, which I think has been around for like years and years, but it's not really very. It's not like a platform. It's kind of like old school, like looking. So we wanted to create something fresh and kind of more user friendly, etc. And
I had this person on my podcast, Casey Adams. He had a podcast called Rise of the Young, and he started a business called Media Kits. And I think he's going for what you're going for, but it creates a little profile for you. So then you just like connect people. There's people getting into the game, so stay on top of your stuff. And
that's the thing.
It's a great business.
Yeah, it's funny because when you get competition, competition's a good thing and a bad thing. Obviously, like it's good because it shows you that there's demand in the marketplace. Right. But then I've as an entrepreneur, I always like. So a lot of my staff will like get caught up and, oh, look, they've just done this feature or they've just done that feature. I've always been really a big believer in being single-minded and just like, don't get too obsessed with the competition, because that's like, it can really grind you down. Right. And also if you just start copying everything they do, then you're only as good as them. You want to try and be innovative. You want to really try and be single-minded and come up with your own ideas and forge your own pathway. And then when you notice that they start copying you, that's kind of like, interestingly, with my radio company, that's exactly as what happened. We were very kind of early to the market. We've got quite a few competitors now, but it's amazing how many of the competitors have literally just copied, like either the product we've built, like they almost look the same, or even just down to like our content strategy. Like there was one, a few years ago, we were first launching, we were building up the content on the website, and we would write a blog post, top 10 tips for radio DJs or something. And they would literally then go and basically copy that post exactly, and like just reword it literally. Here are the top 10 tips for radio presenters,
There's really nothing you can do about it, right?
Nothing you can do, but it's like when you see them imitating you, it's kind of flattering in a sense, because it's like, exactly. You could go ahead and copy it because all you like, but we'll always be the ones ahead.
Right. That means that they're like, what should we do? Well, let's look at the best and see what they're doing and copy. So exactly. It is definitely a compliment. It's like, you wish they wouldn't do it if you had a choice, but it's a little bit of a pat on the back to yourself. It's like, we're the leaders in the industry. So it's a good sign to yourself that you're doing something right. So don't go start copying other people. Stick to what you're doing. So I think that's good.
That's always been part of my mantra. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Yeah. What message you want to leave the audience of the Sean Lowery Show with?
Well, if you want to connect with me, if you head to my website, jamesm.com/connect, all my social links and everything on there. I'm quite often creating, like you mentioned earlier, content about, growing your audience, how to create podcasts, talking about different gear and equipment you can buy and all that kind of interesting, nerdy stuff. And also check out matchmaker.fm if you're looking, if you've got your own show and you want to get guests, or if you're interested in appearing on podcasts. I guess I'll leave it with like a loose little pitch there. It's been fantastic talking to you, Sean. Really, really appreciate the opportunity.
For sure.
I think it's been a really good conversation. Actually.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed it. And if you are a podcaster and you're watching this and you're not following James, you're missing out. Not everyone's a podcaster, but if you are, go follow him. And really appreciate it. This has been awesome.
If you're not a podcaster, think about doing it because it's really good fun.
There's not enough.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, James, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll continue to keep in touch.